A really big thank you to both Noel and Anna and Punta Urea Festival. Those sort of moments when somebody contacts you and has an interest and a love for what you do are so important. I was saying this just to Aurora last night. I put all my work online, and then it's sort of interesting that you don't really know what happens to it. And then completely out of the blue, someone like Noel or Aurora maybe shows some to students, or they contact you and ask you, please show some work in our festival. And it can just give you an amazing amount of encouragement in what you're doing. So thank you very much. I thought it was really interesting this morning that both Paul and Anna were talking about sort of themes that seem to be kind of coming through in the festival of kind of emergent patterns, of algorithms, of applying some form of control or not control over the processes that you're working with. I'll actually be mentioning some of those things during my talk. I'll be kind of applying them to myself, though, and the way that I work rather than the way I code or the way that I put work together. It's actually sort of algorithms that I apply to the way that I approach work and emergent patterns that I come through from doing things like this, where I actually sit down and think about what actually have I been doing for the last 20 years. This is the first time I've done a talk like this, so I didn't really know where to start. Luckily, in the summer, I bumped into an old friend of mine I hadn't seen for about 15 years. We used to share a house together, and as we were leaving, she said, I've actually got half a dozen of your sketchbooks in my car, if you want them. You left them at the house when you moved out. And these sketchbooks went back 30 years, and they were a real insight to what I was interested in when I was 19, 20 years old. They were a real interest into seeing patterns that emerged throughout those years, ways that I'd approached working, an interesting relationship with technology, and an approach to sort of autonomy within making work as well. So I think unless I'd seen those sketchbooks, it would probably been a very different talk. So that's where the emergent patterns from the title for the talk comes from. It's kind of looking back at some of the ways in which I've kind of approached making work in the past and seeing those emergent patterns come through in some of the techniques that I've used. And the electric paintings actually stems from the title I gave to my first piece of moving image work. Which was my first piece of work that I made with technology. And it was also sort of really thinking, and I still now think like a painter, even though I'm working with digital and analog technology. So that was quite a insightful title to come across in one of my sketchbooks. This is actually some of the stills from electric paintings. They were a series of images that I'd taken, that I'd videoed of a construction site in Nottingham. I was really interested in construction sites after living in London for a period of time, and I became really fascinated by what I thought was the architecture of living in a city, but I realized later on that it was actually the infrastructure. I was really interested with the infrastructure of the city. I was really interested in the way that people moved through the architecture. I was interested in the transport systems that seemed to sort of snake its way from Clapham Junction towards the city. I was really interested in the fact that there was sort of an underground map of the London tube system that sort of had a similarity to what was going on above the ground, but not quite. It didn't quite match up. And then when I moved to Nottingham to go to university, I didn't have that infrastructure to kind of look at. So I started focusing on construction sites. And a lot of the same things were happening in construction sites. There were bold sort of concrete foundations. And then as the layers were added to the building, it would become more and more refined. Everything would kind of be designed to kind of work in unison. So once the plumbing pipes went in and then electricians came through, you could actually see the construction kind of building over a period of time. And I was lucky that they were building a large multi-story car park and what was essentially an enormous hole in the middle of Nottingham. It was this enormous crater in the middle of Nottingham, and they decided to put a multi-story car park in there. So I would go with a VHS camera, which is about this size, and what felt like the largest and heaviest tripod in the world. I'd walk over there and just point the camera at the construction site and hope something interesting would happen. I had no concept of constructing scenes. I didn't even move the camera for about a year. I was so used to doing still life painting prior to this, but you don't want anything to move. So I didn't even consider moving the camera. And then I would take this video material and I would edit it on a VHS linear tape-to-tape edit suite. And that was my first experience of working with technology to make art. And it was a steep learning curve. Even though I've kind of engaged with technology most of my creative life, I don't find it particularly natural. It doesn't come easy to me. I kind of tend to have to just repeat tasks quite often to get some kind of process in place. And I found that with editing initially. You couldn't really do very much with the edit suite, and I had a limited amount of time in there as well. There was some basic effects like pixelate. There was you could solarize the image, you could composite the image on top of one another, and it was kind of okay, but I wasn't particularly excited about what I was doing until one day I didn't quite edit two video clips together tightly enough, and I got a little glitch in between. And this sort of just was like a door opening up for me. It was way more interesting than anything that I was doing. It seemed to be really like a pure signal, a pure electronic signal I was just fascinated with. And really ephemeral. It would come and then go, just one frame long, two if I was lucky. So I started to kind of gather these glitches together as best I could, quite often just photographing them straight from the TV screen. I did find an essay and some notes in one of my sketchbooks where I kind of talk quite a lot about music in my sketchbooks. And I've always had a real love for music, especially electronic music. And at the time I was listening to a lot of bands like Microstoria and SND and Oval and Mouse and Mars and Aphex Twin or Tekra. And some of these groups were just really stretching and pulling the electric signal of sound around in the most incredible ways. And they really felt like really exciting landscapes to me. And I did make a few notes wondering what the visual equivalent would be, even though I kind of stumbled upon it quite by chance. And then I presented these works as acetates on TV screens. I think I must have recorded at least one glitch for a period of time because I remember somebody looking at one of the glitches that didn't really move, but he was sure that it was moving. So that really made me think about the units of animation. I presume the lowest unit of animation was 2. But more than one person mentioned that they kind of really thought that the images were moving. It was maybe to do with the fact that they were looking at a TV screen and they expected something to happen. Or it could be that they were kind of creating some kind of movement in their sort of visual cortex. But that really made me think about, well, how short can an animation be? So quite a lot of the work just became single isolated images. And for the second time, it started like a real kind of exploratory process where I was kind of giving up the autonomy of creating work to chance, to kind of exploration and kind of speculative process of working. This is an animation of the glitches. Thought this was just the most exciting thing at the time. And I was also really interested to find a couple of drawings that I had in my sketchbook. The top one was made probably about in my 95. I'd stopped painting and started using felt tip pens because I really wanted a sort of really kind of clean schematic line. And I couldn't really achieve that with oil paint, so I'd started making these little felt tip drawings, and then maybe a year, 18 months later, I produced the bottom square on the left, the bottom panel on the left, which felt like the top sketch had kind of drifted through my unconscious into some editing process that I wasn't actually quite aware of. When I finished university, I bought my first computer, and I didn't have a video card for about a year, so I was kind of messing around with audio clips in Wavelab, just making little loops. And then I got my video card, and I think I had aspirations for essentially just working like a painter. I really wanted to work with layers of material. And my computer was like nowhere near up to the job. I couldn't really see the result of any effects that I'd added to the video clips in real time. I had to export it out to see that. Even short clips would take an hour or 2 hours. So I kind of hit this wall with technology where I was actually finding it quite frustrating to work with. And it kind of dawned on me that I wasn't just interested in making work. It was really important to me that the way I made the work and the way that felt kind of comfortable and natural and organic to me. So the reason I'm mentioning this period is because a really interesting thing happened in that I was invited to produce some live visuals for a multimedia event. And I asked my friend Jim Boxall to come along and help me. We had 2 VHS players each and a mixing desk. And we just played video clips from documentaries, some material that we shot ourselves. We'd mixed to a DJ or a band that was playing in the cafe bar of the festival. And it was the first time that I realized there was actually a way of working with technology organically and responsively as well. So I was really responding to what Jim was playing. He was responding to what I was playing. We were both responding to the DJ. And there was an audience for the first time as well. So the audience was kind of responding to everything. And it felt like a really kind of organic, natural way of working. It felt like painting, actually. And it kind of gave me reignited an interest in working with video material in a kind of collage style. To supplement some of the videos that I had been working with which was a lot of sort of Stanley Kubrick clips, and there's lots and lots of Koyaanisqatsi, a shocking amount of Koyaanisqatsi that we were using, so lots of sort of found material. But to supplement that, I'd started to make short animations in After Effects, and we sometimes work thematically, so we kind of work from left to right when we were doing live visuals. Sometimes we work centrally, so I'd make kind of receding circles, just very simple animations, or I'd make a scrolling color bar that would move from left to right, and you know, it'd be really kind of effective if you kind of daisy chain three projectors together. You could really start almost shifting the room around, depending on how you applied the video material and animations. The other thing that I was doing with these short loops. Because I was kind of helping out with the multimedia event. It allowed me to it gave me a deadline every month to kind of produce work, which was really, really important when I left university. Just like a reason to kind of carry on making. And I was also kind of making videos for friends who were in bands, and then whatever video material I had, I would just kind of gather together and kind of make my own work. The one on the left that's playing is for the anniversary of the moon landing. And the other one was a friend of mine, Emma Nublet, whose band I recorded and then repurposed some of the footage. And this really was just about as much as my computer could kind of take at the time. So this sort of interest in relationship with technology, being really, really interested in technology. I'm still kind of really fascinated by technology and development in AI and NFTs and so forth. So I was kind of starting to dip my toes into After Effects, really intrigued by the fact that you could possibly make everything you wanted to use within the software itself. I was a kind of reluctant cameraman, and that I would go out to gather material, but what I was actually really interested in was kind of processing the material. And then there was a bit of software that kind of possibly offered like a way of just creating everything, although I was still going out with a camera and video and textures at the time. I was really interested in textures to sort of like as a counterbalance to a very clean graphic design aesthetic. And some of my early After Effects work is just exercises. They're just exercises in how to actually use the software. I was really trying to work out how to deal with layers after kind of really wanting to work with layers, working with layers of video material, quite a handful. I remember keyframes being quite steep learning curve as well. And then just trying to kind of learn the basics. How do you make something move? How do you mask something out? How do you make something change color over time? And so all these individual sketches were kind of getting squirreled away into folders. And I think at the time, at some point or another, I just decided, well, I wonder what would happen if I put these sketches together. And that's really how I started working in animation. And again, really kind of speculative and kind of really open to chance as well. I was really interested in the substructure of the software. And I think I'd taken that from my interest in the infrastructure of the city, but in the software, there was all these interesting marks and shapes, like anchor points and mask shapes and bounding boxes and XYZ coordinates. There were motion trails when you moved something in the software. They would all disappear when you exported the film out. So I spent quite a lot of time just working out how do I actually capture that. And this is probably a period before there was even kind of screen capture software. I certainly wasn't aware of any at the time. And I was really working in a kind of very much a sort of tableau manner. Really just like a canvas. It was just like thinking again like a painter where the material's here, it may move, it may change over time. There isn't going to be another scene. There isn't really going to be a kind of temporal arc involved in this. And I was just allowing the clips to play out and loop, but I was building in some kind of disorder into the algorithm in that I would purposely if I was making an exercise or I was making a loop, making a little animation, I would make the loops different lengths. So some would be 10 seconds long, some would be 18 seconds long, some would be 32 or 15 seconds long. So that if they did a loop, they were always going to loop in a slightly different position and offer different kind of compositional options. So again, just allowing chance to sort of play its hand. These are some examples of just placing materials together to see what the result would be, and just looking for the sort of the kind of incident where, like the top left-hand panel, I'd be really excited by the sweep of that composition. Be really interested in the kind of the texture of the diamonds, or on the bottom right-hand image, where the image seems to sort of mirror itself or shadow itself. Or the bottom left-hand image where it's just doesn't quite work. I was really interested in kind of compositional combinations. It didn't quite make sense. There was something slightly off about it. I think it kind of gave me the option for sort of additional layers of material that I could work into it. And these sort of developed into kind of full-blown compositions. So the top and bottom left-hand panels, it'd be exactly the kind of thing that I was looking for. I'd be looking for that sort of interesting sweep. And kind of just feeling like there's some kind of potential there. I'm not quite sure what it is. It's a bit top-heavy, but I think I kind of like that. And then just adding and subtracting material until it started to come together. And really allowing and listening to the work as well. Kind of listening to what the composition was suggesting, really. I kind of figured that if something really didn't work, that's the work telling you, that's the composition telling you. And if that's the case, then it will also tell you when something does work. So I'd really listen to the way the work was developing. The top and bottom right-hand panels, the top one, I was running out of hard drive space on my computer, so I decided to take 40 clips, and before I deleted them to create some space, I would just composite them together in After Effects, add lots of blend modes, and then just export the whole thing out with the sound. So it was pretty gnarly, it was pretty ugly. But there were little gems of compositional chance in there that I was really interested in. And that actually led to the bottom panel on the right, which is an animation I called Apparatus of Circumstance. And that was essentially based on the collision of all the material in the top panel. So kind of finding these little details, finding something in the work started to become quite important to me, or certainly an area of interest. So this is an example of that, where the panel on the left is the original detail, and it was small. I remember in the composition, it was a really small area of the screen. But I was really, really interested in it. And I think it kind of reminded me of Francis Bacon's sand dune paintings, which I really love. And again, it's sort of a little bit of an awkward composition, but there was just something in it that I really liked. So I then would kind of decide to start to rebuild that one composition with different video materials. And a couple of interesting things happened from that. The first one would be the panel on the right's probably got 6 different components in there. So I would have 6 layers of video in After Effects, each of different lengths. There would be one point where the whole composition comes together as you see it. Depending on where I placed that in the timeline, I realized that I could work from that point forward in time, but I could also work back in time. So I was finding ways of moving away from just having the tableau with everything laid out. I was allowing myself a point to build up to and then a point to build out from. And that was the first time I'd really kind of adopted some kind of narrative, some kind of temporal narrative to what I was doing. Because the different video clips would be slightly different lengths, they would end at different points. And as they ended, they would start revealing the layers underneath and suggesting new compositional combinations which would lead the work forward. So that was a really kind of important part of this sort of development of the way that I was animating. And this panel on the right is from a piece of work called Building on a Detail, which I'll be showing. And that's where the title comes from. So it was literally building on the detail of another piece of work. There was a point when I'd been using After Effects for sort of maybe 3 or 4 years, and I was really starting to feel the kind of creative muscle memory. So, and I could predict if I filmed something, if I was out with a video camera and I filmed something, I'd kind of know what I was going to do with the material, but not necessarily in a good way. I didn't really like it being that predictable. I'm kind of like, yeah, I'll mask this out, add that effect, and I thought that I was being kind of cornered slightly by the software, but actually it was just the algorithm, the interface and the algorithm of the software that was suggesting, you know, how to work with it. It's the same for any piece of software that you use. But I wanted to try and break away from that. And I'd seen on Tumblr that a guy in North Carolina with the amazing name of Logan Albymouth was making these hacked video units under his name Tachyon Plus. They're sort of like 80s video units. This one's an Archer video enhancer. And he was hacking it by just connecting all of the circuits to one another. And it's just like this chaos machine. It's amazing. And after the predictability of After Effects, I just kind of adopted this troublesome toddler of a machine, which was uncontrollable, unpredictable, completely chaotic. And I just spent hours and hours with it. And any adjustment of any of the knobs would completely throw whatever signal you'd created off in kind of wild tangents. Even actually just moving around the object, it was so sensitive. I guess I was maybe sort of, for me, it was like the really kind of first time I'd really kind of found an interest in analog material. And I realized how sensitive it was. So I'd have this unit, which is called a Fun21. And I would have it set up and kind of connected to a kind of cathode ray tube TV. I have a camera on a tripod, and whenever I kind of capture some interesting pattern or mark, I would record it straight from the TV screen. And sometimes I would set it up, I would get something really interesting on the TV screen, I would turn to the camera to switch it on, and just by moving away, it'd change the pattern on the TV. And I thought, this really is a chaos machine. It's just almost kind of got its own mind. And I really, really loved it for that. I spent so long working with it. And the kind of results you would get were fairly chaotic. I became really interested in mark making. I didn't feed any signal into the unit for about a year. And then I slowly started to introduce basic shapes, circles and squares and triangles. But I was really interested just in that kind of clean electric signal. And again, probably kind of mirrored some of the music I was listening to. So I was listening to kind of Alva Noto and Ella and Callie Malone. So that's sort of like really rich, resonant, analog sounds. And then I would start kind of generating a library of material to work with, which again was really a useful part of kind of trying to kind of find some flow with working with technology. I would kind of spend some time gathering material. I would have folders and folders of material that I could then draw on when I was actually composing an animation. So I didn't have that thing where I had to stop and then kind of go to another bit of software to kind of make something in order to kind of add to a composition. I really didn't want to do that. And kind of when I did do that, I would kind of maybe go back to what I was doing 2 or 3 days later, and kind of, I'm not quite sure what I was excited about, you know. Whatever was going on 3 days ago with that composition is kind of gone. So I really just wanted to kind of flow and kind of be able to work very, very kind of quickly. Again, much like kind of painting. So kind of having a library of material was really useful. And it's really something that I kind of picked up from when I was doing live visuals. And we just had lots and lots of material that we could work with, but it was all on kind of CD-ROM at the time. And then these are sort of the kind of animations I was doing at the time. Really very much still influenced by this sort of imagined version of the city. Some kind of infrastructure with kind of mechanism that was at play. And really kind of trying to play with 2D space as well. I was sort of obsessed with the fact that I was kind of working on a 2D plane, but I really wanted to kind of try to create a 3D space within that. So I was trying to kind of build depth into the compositions by using motion in some areas, using kind of particular colors in other areas, and kind of trying to draw the eye around the composition. I worked with kind of cubes for a long time. So I was sort of really interested in just trying to animate a rotating cube, try to make it seem as 3D possible as I could in a 2D space. And these are sort of paintings from when I was about 19 in London. They kind of reminded me of that last animation that we were looking at. I tried to sort of refine the process of working with analog video. I kind of bought a module from the really great LZX Industries. They produce some really interesting analog video synthesizers and individual modules. I only had the Visual Cortex for about a year, and then I added 2 waveform generators to that. And again, you could feed a signal in, but I didn't really do that for quite a while. I was just interested in this sort of kind of closed circuit. You could color grade left and right channels. You could mix between left and right channels. There were some shape ramps that you could add to it. And interestingly, there was a strobe effect. So you could automate a strobe between left and right channel. And just really interesting things happened when I started to kind of work with the strobe. I was really fascinated with that. I was really aware of the structuralist filmmakers when I was at university. But I really kind of admired them for the way that they used the material as the sort of the framework for creating work. That's what I was really interested in. So they were kind of using the material and the machinery to kind of make the work, and then kind of this is the work. It's the material. It's the repetition. But then when I started working with the strobe myself, I kind of realized that what they were doing was really experiential as well. And strobe is such a sort of odd kind of parameter to work with. I kind of found at lower frequencies really calm and meditative. Higher frequencies, it can kind of make you feel quite agitated. I found some frequency that I've never repeated. I kind of felt my consciousness leave the back of my head, kind of got up to about there, and then I had to look away. It was kind of fascinating and really scary at the same time. So you do have to be careful with strobe, and there will be flickering videos in my show reel. So if you're sensitive to that, be aware of it. But again, I kind of spent months and months and months looking at strobing material. There were sort of things that would happen like strobing 2 colors together would generate a 3rd color. And quite often it would be difficult to capture digitally. So I kind of presumed it was either an analog phenomena or it was something that was happening in your visual cortex. I remember kind of seeing, you could see patterns sometimes if you got the right color, temperature, and the right kind of frequency of strobe, these kind of meshes of kind of branch-like or root-like patterns would appear. And again, really difficult to capture digitally. So I thought, maybe that's just scratches on my cornea, or it's something that's happening within the CRT TV. So much like the Fun21 unit, I just started to gather this material together. I was really happy that I was getting a slightly cleaner image, really fascinated with the strobe, and just started making folders and folders of experiments with it, and enjoying the physicality of it. I was really enjoying the physicality. And by this point, I had kind of two parts to my practice, where I was gathering material. I may do that for sort of 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, I had lots and lots of material, or certainly something I was excited about. I would then take that material and start composing animations. So this is the kind of result I was getting from the LZX material. Again, trying to work with depth, so basic geometric shapes. Again, kind of some weird obsession with the cube. So the benefits of analog mark making, but the precision of digital editing. It seemed like a really great combination. There was like a particular depth to analog mark making that seems kind of infinite. Whereas with I know it's changed now because I was looking at Alba's amazing animation last night, and you know what she was doing with coding was quite incredible. But at the time, I was finding when I really broke down the digital image, I was just getting to the pixel very, very quickly. And it seemed like there wasn't anything interesting there to find. So I was really happy with the potential for analog mark making, which just seemed far more wide-ranging. And there was a particular depth to the color that I really liked as well. I was starting to kind of add sort of tile patterns to some of my animations as well. I think the idea was that I was kind of going to sort of bombard the eye with information, so it would start making, it would just start creating space or trying to work out what the hell was going on and maybe kind of create a three-dimensional object in the viewer's visual cortex rather than it being created on the screen. So I was looking at a lot of Islamic tile patterns, which I really love. I was really interested in the sort of intricacy, the beauty of them, but there just seemed to be this kind of underlying kind of math behind them as well. And of course, when you see a lot of them in a large space, they're just almost overpowering, very experiential in their own way. So I was using kind of these basic kind of triangle tile patterns as well. Just some influences quite quickly. Mughal art. Really, really loved Mughal art for a long time. And I sort of think I recognized what they were doing with planes on a 2D surface. Sort of exaggerated angles, lots of the use of a pattern to kind of push planes forward or make them recede. There was exaggerated scale. It was a really kind of exciting and fun way of dealing with perspective and depth on a 2D plane. And they probably had access to mathematical European perspective. I read somewhere that they rejected it because they thought the narrative within the work was more important than perspective realism, which I really kind of love about it as well. This painting by David Jones called Petra Rosenhag, who was his fiancée at the time. It was painted in 1932. This blew me away when I first saw it. It's still one of my favorite paintings. I only have 2 painting references in my studio, and this is one of them. It was to do with the background and the foreground space. He seemed to kind of spend way more attention to the background space than the floral pattern in the background space and the floral pattern on Petra's dress, which I thought was kind of really interesting. And I didn't quite understand why he'd done that. And then once you get down to the sort of bottom right-hand corner where there are actual flowers, it just becomes this sort of soup of information, which I love. The way that it's so messy and noisy and complicated, and you can't quite make out what is the background, what is the flower, where the arm is exactly. And it really kind of gave me the idea of making work that was more sort of intangible, that didn't have as much density, the word just wasn't quite as solid. And there was something about that that really intrigued me. It was just like a little door opening. You know, it's happened a few times. It's just like this little door opens and you're like, oh, okay, that's the way to do something. And then Fabric of the Cosmos by Brian Greene. I'm kind of really interested in physics and kind of cosmology and science in general, I guess. And the Fabric of the Cosmos was like this history of physics from the largest objects in the past to the smallest objects in the future, in the present rather. And it introduced me to entropy, which was really important to me because I used it as a way of hanging my animations. I've given it a framework. So that is just a kind of chaos becoming order and then becoming chaos again. And I used that a lot because I really didn't have any narrative arc for my work. So I've always really quite struggled with that. So I used entropy for a long time. It reintroduced Islamic tiles, actually, because they're really important in physics because not because of the pattern, because of the shape of the actual tiles. So they're infinitely repeatable. And that is something really special in physics because it means that they can use it as a model for space, for the universe. If it's infinitely repeatable, it means that they can kind of use it as a mathematical model. And there's a physicist called Roger Penrose who's done a lot of work on tile math. And his sketchbooks are amazing. You can see some of the pages of a sketchbook online, and they're beautiful. They're really, really beautiful. And it introduced me to superposition, which is particles being in any position in the universe or any rotational direction until they're observed, and then they lock. So I was really intrigued with these bits of information that had different positions in space until they're observed, and then they form a solid bit of information. And I think this kind of fed into this sort of slightly kind of more intangible, less dense aesthetic that I was thinking about, and kind of reminded me of how we perceive information much more, that we kind of perceive information just as different bits of data that kind of come from the sound, the acoustics of the room, your feet on the ground, how long you've been sitting in a chair. I started to look at strobe again in a slightly different way, using the strobe effect in After Effects. I was aware of it, but I hadn't really looked at it. And of course, because it's digital, it's really precise, which means that you can make an image visible for a really short period of time. It could be 5 frames or 10 frames or 7 frames, and then transparent for 10 frames or 5 frames. So you can be really precise about when an image comes up. And then if you're working in After Effects and you've got a number of layers that have all got a strobe effect applied to them, it means that when the top layer is invisible, the bottom layer will show through. And then when the second layer is invisible, the third layer will show through. So in this way, you can kind of create a sort of sporadic, episodic kind of image. And then if you kind of place the constituent parts of the image in space within the composition, you can start building an image made up of parts rather than kind of a solid, static object. So I noticed in that example, I'd actually started cutting into the work, which is just masking out and using the negative space, which was always a really good sign. It was a really good sign. It meant I was kind of inside the work a little bit, and I was kind of really working into it, like you would work into a painting. So I was always happy when I kind of saw the potential, or I revealed a bit of negative space, and what I was hoping was underneath kind of came through. So I've continued working around sort of themes with physics, I think, and sort of using different tools. So I've kind of dropped the strobe for a long time. I think I was kind of overusing it. So I decided to not use that so much. And then can I use it sort of sparingly now? So this, for example, is a piece of work that I made a couple of years ago that I haven't really developed. I need to kind of go back to it, which is really sort of trying to illustrate the physicist David Bohm's idea around implicit and explicit order. The explicit order is the things that we recognize as objects, tables and chairs and bottles and skin. And then the implicit order is the order of information below that undoubtedly exists, but we don't see. I was playing around with the strobe for the first time in quite a while, and I had this material. I'd been making lots of these geometric patterns, and I couldn't really find a home for them, and then I applied them to images of nature, and they kind of worked within the nature, started to distort the nature in really kind of interesting ways. So it's just a simple strobe, and then really imposing a very strong pattern on top of another pattern, like within nature, the branches and the leaves and the flower. And just sort of finding these really interesting points where they kind of merge and then distort. And I'm kind of really interested in this sort of back and forth between the materials that I work with, and that kind of moved into sort of ideas around non-dualism, which is the sort of idea that there's no separation between objects at all. There's been kind of interested in this empty space for quite a while, where actually it's not an empty space at all. There's quite seething kind of energetic, massive information that we just don't see. So non-dualism says, well, there's no separation. It's all the same seething, massive information, just in slightly different forms. So by this point, I'm kind of just setting myself challenges, really. It's kind of like thinking about, well, how do I illustrate that? How would that look? It's taken me kind of really long time, but then I kind of stumbled into working with Cinema 4D and working with glass simulations, which is really interesting because you can apply glass simulation to an object. If you place another pattern or an object behind it, it'll distort the object behind. So there's like a relationship between the two. There's kind of reliance upon one another, which is as close as I've got to describing it. Of course, if you kind of go too far and you have true non-dualism, then they both merge and you lose the object, which is a kind of bit of a quandary. This is a sort of really basic 3D model of a plant that is revolving. And then the glass simulation is just slightly offsetting the pattern in the background. And I guess what I've kind of also working with as well recently is kind of representative and non-representative or abstract. It's like that interesting sort of line where is the line exactly? When does something become abstract and non-representative? So there's sort of kind of constant back and forward between those two sort of positions, really. This is another kind of refraction study. I do work quite a lot with the figure more recently. This is a head study. But interestingly, that sort of boundary between, it's kind of a head study, and then there's points where you lose the head altogether, and it becomes abstract. And really kind of playing around with time as well. I'm really not making sort of 3 or 4 minute animations anymore. The kind of animations are just as long as they need to be. I was chatting to Noel about this last night, and I think last time I put something online, I think it was 4 seconds long. That's exactly how long it needed to be. So I'm kind of really not trying to tie myself to the idea that, it needs to be 3 or 4 minutes long, otherwise I can't put any work into a festival, or I'm just allowing the work to be what it needs to be. It kind of reinvigorated a real interest in kind of pure signal, and that sort of pure analog signal. So this is an analog waveform that I've applied to an object in Cinema 4D, and then applied a equivalent wave tone to that animation. And I'm really interested in sort of fleshing these out, because I've got lots of waveforms that I didn't really know what to do with. I'm kind of looking at them like sculptures, I think. And I'm thinking about them kind of on a large scale, with maybe 4 or 6 of them all kind of interacting with each other in terms of the tone that they're producing. So that's sort of what I've been doing just recently. This was sort of from last week. That is the conclusion of my talk.